Over the last several years, I have been incredibly hard on Microsoft. Incredibly hard on Microsoft. And I'm starting to wonder, was I wrong for being that hard on Microsoft? Was my impatience and frustration and sometimes even anger at Microsoft misplaced? Sometimes I like to take stock of my stances in life and make sure that it actually makes sense and I'm not just acting out of just blind bigotry and perhaps based on past information that is no longer valid. So I want to talk about this a little bit. This is going to be a fairly casual chit chat, but I feel like this is an important discussion for me to have with all of you. And honestly, it's probably a good, just general topic for us as a free software, open source, and Linux community to think about right now. A little backstory. I worked at Microsoft for about 5 years or so, give or take, around the turn of the millennium. And the experience was interesting. It was very mixed. I met a lot of great people. I worked on a lot of actually kind of fun projects to work on. I worked on a lot of the weird cross-platform stuff at Microsoft. I worked on Windows Media Player, I kid you not, for classic Mac OS, Solaris, testing against Linux-based servers, serving up Windows Media content. This is all totally true. I worked on NT5 before it became known as Windows 2000. I worked on the original DRM implementation at Microsoft. That's totally true. Quit during that one. And I worked on Office for Macintosh. So I was kind of all over the place. I was in all of the redheaded stepchild groups at Microsoft, you know? And it left me with mostly a positive set of feelings, but also a generally good understanding of how the company works, of what the culture is like, of what the dynamic is like. And I had experiences within that company that also left a very bad taste in my mouth. During the Windows 2000 ship party, I sat, or stood rather, in front of a stage where Steve Ballmer gave a long, angry rant about how much he hates Linux. Like how much he hates Linus and Linux, and he hates all of it, and he was trying to get the audience, the crowd pumped up, because it was Microsoft employees, you know, that played pretty well. And so much so, I was literally front row, where my glasses were covered in Steve Ballmer spittle. That's not like a metaphorical thing. That actually happened. I actually walked away with a face of Steve Ballmer spittle. It's not like he spat on me on purpose or anything. He was just talking really loud and boisterously, and little spittle particles flew out. And that kind of sticks with you, you know? You get Steve Ballmer's spittle on your face while he's yelling about how much he hates Linux. You don't forget that. Like, you don't go home and suddenly you're like, whatever, he didn't mean it. Like, you have the spit on your face to verify the man hated it, right? So that really left a lasting impression on me, right? I think justifiably. And then Microsoft's actions over the years, where they've declared Linux to be a cancer, open source and free software a cancer, as enemy number one, and constant lawsuits and threats and whatnot towards either Linux companies or companies that were adopting Linux technologies, sometimes around file systems like FAT and whatnot, really just kind of made me feel like, geez, man, I'm not the kind of guy that would point at a company and say they're the enemy, but if there was an enemy, it would be them, you know? And so I just grew to not trust them. I grew to not trust Microsoft. And it's been many years since I've worked there. You know, it's 2018 now. I don't know. It's been 15, 20 years, whatever it is. And here we are. Microsoft has proclaimed their love for Linux. They've joined the Linux Foundation. They actually bought, with $500,000, a seat on the Linux Foundation board of directors. They've joined the open source organizations from here to the moon. And they bought GitHub. They've hired so many people that I respect within the open source and Linux worlds. And now they've gotten to the point where they've joined the Open Invention Network, which has a kind of like a patent pledge group where you join it, and by joining it, you're contributing your patents relating to Linux, right? So your Linux kernel or system related patents, and you say that you will not sue or seek any legal action against any other member of that organization, of the OIN, the Open Invention Network, for utilizing that patent in Linux system related things, right? It's very narrow and focused, but also a very good thing, right? And so these good things keep adding up. Or at the very least, pro Linux things or things where Microsoft is spending money on Linux, they keep adding up. And at first, I'm highly skeptical. Highly skeptical. I mean, come on. Microsoft buying a seat on the Linux Foundation board? That smells weird. I'm sorry it does. But when taken in context of a lot of other activities, the fact that Microsoft is earning a significant amount of income now through Azure services hosting Linux-based systems in their Azure cloud, that's a big thing. They are open sourcing some code, not a lot. No, let's be fair here. When you're talking about a company open sourcing code, you kind of got to look at it as how much of their code, kind of percentage-wise, are they actually opening up. And being as they're such a gigantic organization with decades upon decades of historical code, it would be very, very easy for them to open up huge amounts of code without ever affecting their bottom line. And they're only open sourcing a few things. You know, they open source the earliest versions of MS-DOS, like version 1. And parts of the earliest versions of Windows. Like we're talking like Win286 stuff here, you know? I mean, long before Windows 3.0 even came into, it was even a gleam in Bill's eye. So they are open sourcing some things, and they are contributing back the Linux kernel. Mostly, it seems, where it directly impacts Microsoft and their Azure businesses, but that's still contributing back to the kernel. They're still making and contributing open source code. So, with all these positive things, I mean, really, they're positive. They may be positive with caveats, but they're positive. Should I be giving Microsoft a second chance here? I mean, you can hear it in my voice. I am hesitant. I am reticent to give them that second chance. But I've laid out over the last year or two the things I thought Microsoft should do in order to kind of earn a chance at my personal respect for them within the open source and Linux world. And one of the things was they needed to stop suing companies for using patents. And that's a big deal for me, just a really big deal. And joining the Open Invention Network is a big step in that direction. Now, I wanted further information around that. I read an article from Bradley Kuhn of the Software Freedom Conservancy where he pointed out that this doesn't necessarily, that pledge, that joining of the OIN from Microsoft doesn't necessarily apply to a wide variety of patents, including exFAT, which is what Microsoft has sued companies over before. And so he was asking, hey, Microsoft, are you planning to take some sort of action so that those patents, those FAT-related patents, will be included in this? And there are easy actions that Microsoft could take, such as submitting patches to the mainline Linux kernel and related projects that include that code, and then their patents are included in that, and then that would make it so other people who are part of that patent group of OIN would be able to utilize that patented technology, right? And as far as I can tell, Microsoft hasn't responded to that. So I sent emails to almost every contact I have at Microsoft, not at least a good chunk of them. Some of the press contacts and media relations people, I sent emails to just some friends that I have at Microsoft, like, hey, I'm looking for an answer on this. Like, what is Microsoft planning to do around these patents? Does Microsoft consider these patents included? Is Microsoft just not going to sue other companies over these patents anymore at all and is fully pledging that, or is something else going on? I asked publicly on Twitter that same question, like, what's the deal with this? Like, is this included? Specific patent. It's a real easy question to answer, right? And I asked a lot of people, and one of the only people that got back to me, to his credit, was Nat Friedman. And now you might know Nat Friedman as a guy who's been involved in things like, Mono and whatnot in the past. And now he's at Microsoft, and he's taking over the helm of GitHub with the acquisition of GitHub. So he's a bigwig at Microsoft now. That's a big position to hold, at least publicity-wise. He replied, but in a real cagey way. He replied by saying that, and it was kind of legalese speak, like Microsoft did not negotiate any exemptions, and all the patents that would be applied to the OIN would be applied. It was one of those sorts of responses. Like, well, that didn't really answer the question, because we already know that certain patents aren't applied. And just as a side note, if you're out there seeing a lot of articles that say Microsoft's open sources 60,000 patents, that's technically not true. One, it's not open source. The patents are not open source. They're not available for everyone to use. They're not available for everyone to commit to in any or contribute to in any way, shape, or form. The only thing there is that people who are a member of the same organization, the OIN, should feel a relative ease and security that they won't be sued by Microsoft for potentially infringing on specific patents. So it's not open source at all. It's just that they entered into an agreement, and it's just lucky that many Linux and open source companies are members of that organization. So that kind of frees up a lot of people. The secondary thing is it's definitely not 60,000 patents. Definitely not. It is a teensy-tiny fraction of that, because it's only patents that apply to Linux system, right? Linux system related stuff. So anyway, that aside, so if you're seeing people that are still writing articles or making videos saying Microsoft open source 60,000 patents, kindly message them and tell them to do their homework, because that's absolutely fundamentally not true. So I've asked Microsoft repeatedly. I asked for clarification over and over again of Nat Friedman, of other people, and I got the same answers. I started getting more and more of that same answers. In fact, everyone at Microsoft who replied to me using almost identical wording, as in they looked like they just copied and pasted a internal legalese, this is what our official stance is sort of statement. And that statement did not answer the question about whether or not Microsoft's going to be suing people over the other patents, or those same patents, but people who are outside of the OIN, which they legally can do, or which patents do they consider to be included. There's a whole lot of vagueness there. And it tainted my perception of what would otherwise be a very positive event. Microsoft saying, we're giving these patents, we're not giving these patents, but we're granting members of this organization the ability to use these patents, right? That's a big deal. That is really a big deal, and Microsoft should be applauded for that. But then their cagey response made me go, well, wait a minute. Why are they being so cagey about it? This should be a win for them, right? They should be shouting it from the mountaintops about how great they are. They should be engaging with the community on specific things, saying, yes, this includes fat, or no, it doesn't include fat, but we want it to, so we'll submit a patch, or we will accept Samsung or Red Hat or whoever submitting patches to include some of the other patents Microsoft has, and we will give the thumbs up for that. Like, this is an opportunity for Microsoft to look amazing. And instead of looking amazing, they got cagey. I don't know, why would they get cagey? That feels weird to me. And they have kind of a pattern of doing this sort of thing. I've reached out to Microsoft repeatedly over the last year or so, when they joined the Linux Foundation board of directors, when they purchased a seat, right? And I wanted to talk to them about it. And at first they said, yeah, let's talk to you about it. I'm like, great. You got your guys' schedule. I'll make it work. We'll just set up an interview and we'll get you on the show. And they're like, never mind. They pulled out. And then they came out with their own Linux distribution, right? Azure Sphere OS, right? Which is really just their Microsoft's own Azure specific Linux distro, right? So I want to talk to them about that. Same deal. Yeah, they want to talk to you about that. Oh, well, we're not really going to talk to press about this. We're gonna stay quiet. It's like, well, this could be a huge win for you. Why are you being cagey? And I've heard from multiple friends that I have in Microsoft that they've been instructed to not talk to press, specifically certain members of the press who will remain nameless for the moment. So what do I make of all this? Like, where are we at? Clearly, Microsoft is investing huge amounts of money and resources into Linux and open source, right? Clearly, they are making steps, big steps, towards at least suing people less over patents. That's a big thing. That's a win. It may not be all the way, but that's still a win. They're gobbling up, open source companies. I mean, GitHub's not a fully open source company because GitHub's not open source, but they do help power a lot of open source, and so you could view that as either a good or a bad thing. Either you could view that as Microsoft is helping to make an open source piece of infrastructure, or you could look at it and say, well, Microsoft is just trying to control what the open source world does. So you could look at it as negative or positive there. And I think, honestly, both viewpoints have a certain amount of merit to them. I don't really know what to do. I don't really know what to think or to feel. But what I've decided is this. I have been too hard on them. I've come across too directly concerned about their activities, and that doesn't help if they're legitimately trying to be good open source free software citizens, right? I want to encourage that. I want to see them do more good things. On the flip side, I'm not letting my guard down, because even when they do good things, they get cagey and weird about it. Like, they won't talk to the press about doing good things. They just don't. They just refuse, and that's bizarre. Because Microsoft is good about talking to press. Like, across the company. I mean, I've experienced this from the inside and out. I've been to Microsoft press events as a journalist. I've been involved in their press events as an employee, helping out. I've seen how they interact with the press. And it's usually really a positive thing. Like, they bring the press in, they allow them to interview engineers and general managers and project managers, and they bring them inside the company and they let them walk around and they say, look what we're working on over there. Look what we're working on over here. Here's some early access to the code. Here's why we're doing it. Here's a press conference where, Steve or Bill or Satya or someone's going to get up on stage and talk to you, and then they're going to take questions. They usually do this stuff. But relating to the Linux stuff, they get super cagey. They get cagey about Sphere OS. They get cagey about joining the Linux Foundation. They get cagey about joining the Open Invention Network. They get cagey about buying GitHub. They get cagey about all of it. Why? And I get it. Some of us in the tech press are not totally open to being positive about Microsoft's activities in these regards. So I get where they'd be hesitant to be shown in a bad light. Maybe they think they're doing a great thing, but they're afraid that the press is going to just dog on them, right? I don't know. I need to be a little more open. I need to be a little bit more open to the possibilities that Microsoft is truly acting in the best interests of all of the open source and free software world, while at the same time being really, really guarded. Because until Microsoft is at least willing to sit down and talk to the press, to be open with the press, which they are adamantly refusing to be, it's really hard to get a read on any of this. Because I have not gotten, and this is not an exaggeration, I have asked so many questions to Microsoft, and they've been simple yes or no, or point to this patent, or point to this file, or point to this date sort of questions. Real simple yes or no, not grand philosophy stuff. Real simple specific questions. I've asked tons of them over the last year. I have gotten zero answered, and I'm not alone. If you talk to a lot of the more Linux focused journalists, they have a lot of the same interactions with them. There's a very small handful of Linux journalists that aren't really quite Linux journalists. Anyway, that's a separate topic. But anyway, so here's just my thoughts on this. I'm curious what all of you are thinking along these lines, because this is a tricky one. Microsoft's been the evil empire for a long time. I mean, before that it was IBM, and then it became Microsoft, and they're just, the bad guys, right? But are they the bad guys anymore? Are they half bad, half good? Is it like Harvey Two-Face? Like what's going on? Like, I feel like there's changes afoot, but I'm not 100% certain where things are landing. So here's what I would put out there. Microsoft, if you're watching this, you are, get a hold of me. Let's have a chat. I would love to ask you guys some questions. I would love to get some straightforward answers. And I think there's a real possibility that you guys are doing things with good intentions. If that's the case, it'll become really obvious after answering 2 or 3 questions. Like, super obvious. Like, yeah, I'll ask you a question like, does the OIN stuff include patents around fat? And you'll come in and you could answer it a wide variety of different ways. And it would come across, as long as you were being direct about it, as you guys are being honest and straightforward and trying to help the community, right? Even the hardest possible questions are going to make you guys look good if you talk, because you haven't been talking. So I'm going to put this out there. Open invitation. Anyone at Microsoft, you're welcome on the show whenever you like. I know many of you have been told, don't talk to Lunduk, and that's okay. I don't bite. I worked with your company for a long time, and I'm friends with many of you. And some of you are watching this right now going, oh boy, he's going to make the next meeting I have around this very, very difficult. Sorry, buddies. Get a hold of me. Let's figure all this stuff out. Let's talk about this stuff. Let's see, is Microsoft really in it for the betterment of open source and Linux? Do they really heart it like they say they do? Maybe. I don't really know. I can't tell because you guys won't answer my questions. On this episode of The Lunduk Show, where I just kind of think about this, it's brought to you in part by Pogo Linux. They ship servers and workstations with Linux. They got Linux right in the domain name, right in the company name. They're awesome. Go over to pogolinux.com. Check out the goods they've got. They've got some serious goods. Or Purism, who make laptops and a cell phone's coming out that ships with all free software. All free software, son. Boom. Find out more over at Purism's website, puri.sm. And Lulzbot 3D printers. They make the best 3D printers in the world. They love open source, big supporters of open source hardware as well, and they're just plain fancy. Find out more over at lulzbot.com. And, of course, if you would like more stuff relating to this show, if you want the RSS feeds, if you want the MP3 files, if you want all that good stuff, go over to lunduk.com or patreon.com/Brian Lunduk.